June 2005. A cold, damp air enveloped the forest along the Willamette River, about 18 miles from the town of Corvallis, Oregon. The light from the ground-penetrating radar swept through the dark soil layers, then stopped as a feedback signal appeared on the screen. "There's an object at a depth of 3 feet. The voice of the forensic team leader rang out. Agent Amy Meredith stepped forward, looking down at the patch of ground that an old veteran named Johnny Leon had pointed out just the night before. "Start digging here," she said. Just a few minutes later, the sound of a shovel hitting something hard echoed in the silence. What they found was not just bones, but the answer to a mystery that had lasted more than half a century. What began as an ordinary disappearance in 1954 had now become a completely different story. That night, Thomas and Corinne Halloran, the most respected jewelry store owners in Corvallis, vanished without a trace. The back door open, lights still on, dinner untouched on the table. No blood, no suicide note, just their Ford car missing as well. The search lasted throughout that spring, but then everything fell silent. The case file numbered. Case 54-117H was sealed in 1956, and the Halloran case became one of Oregon's most famous cold cases. Nearly half a century later, when Meredith reopened the file in the state archives, she found only a few faded ink notes and a mysterious scrap of paper that read 427 Glass. A year later, when workers demolished the old Halloran house, they discovered a wooden box hidden in the wall, inside which was a Colt .45, a Super 8 film reel, and a second scrap of paper. A shaky handwritten line, 427 window done. At the same time, advances in fingerprint and DNA forensics turned seemingly meaningless evidence into a vivid narrative of the past. As investigators followed the clues, they not only discovered who pulled the trigger, but also identified the mastermind, someone the community had once loved, calling him the perfect son of the Halloran family. A person who lived among them for 50 years, attending every memorial, placing flowers by his parents' photo, and never revealing that he was the one who made them disappear. Before continuing this shocking story, take a second to hit subscribe and like the video. Because every bit of support from you helps bring forgotten cold cases back into the light, and ensures that voices buried like those of Thomas and Corinne Halloran will never be forgotten again. The Halloran case is not just a story about a solved murder. It is a testament to the power of justice, to the perseverance of investigators who won't let files gather dust, and to the truth, even if buried deep for 51 years, that one day will be found along the banks of the Willamette River. Tonight, we will go back to Oregon in 1954, follow the forgotten investigation, and discover how a small scrap of paper, an old gun, and a faded film reel toppled an entire wall of silence. This is a story of loss, betrayal, and delayed justice, but never denied. The first night of March 1954, the town of Corvallis, Oregon, was shrouded in thick fog. Dim yellow streetlights on Monroe Street cast down onto the rain-slicked pavement, reflecting the gleaming silver sign for Halloran Jewelers, where Thomas and Corinne Halloran had just turned off the lights, locked the door, and driven their pale gray Ford Custom Line home. They were the couple admired by the whole neighborhood, Thomas, the master craftsman of exquisite jewelry, and Corinne, the meticulous woman who always logged every item sold. That night, they got home later than usual. The store clock read 9:43 when Thomas lowered the latch on the door. A drizzle, mixed with cold wind, swept through the dark pine canopies surrounding the suburban road, leading to their small house on the southern edge of town. Around 10 o'clock, a neighbor across the street still saw the Hallorans' living room lights blazing. The radio inside the house carried the local station's late-night news, then went silent. A dog's bark rang out from the backyard, persistent then choked off. After that, silence. No one paid it any mind, because in Corvallis, such nighttime sounds were as familiar as the wind whistling through door cracks. At dawn, with fog still blanketing the wooden fences white, the milkman stopped his truck in front of the Hallorans' door as usual. He knocked lightly twice, but got no answer. The back door was ajar, its hinges creaking in the breeze. From the crack, he saw the kitchen light still on, 2 bowls of cold soup untouched on the dining table. One chair tipped over. The grandfather clock stopped at 12:18. No sign of anyone in the house. Their dog lay silent by the steps, its chain wrapped around a chair leg. The milkman ran next door to call the neighbor lady, and the two of them circled to the back door together. In the kitchen, the floor was damp. The window cracked open, the curtain swaying gently in the early wind. No obvious signs of forced entry, but the air was heavy to the point of suffocation, as if something had just happened and been swept away with the night. The neighbor lady tremblingly picked up the wall phone receiver, her voice choking as she told the Benton County Sheriff's dispatcher, "Sheriff, it's the Hallorans. They're gone. The Hallorans are gone." The dispatcher asked back, his voice still sleepy. "Gone where, ma'am?" She couldn't answer. Right after that, Sheriff James Salo received the call at 6:37 a.m. The dispatcher reported briefly over the phone. Missing persons in South Corvallis, jewelry store couple, house open, no one inside. He frowned, hung up, grabbed his raincoat, and started his old Plymouth, the engine rumbling in the foggy morning. As the car turned onto Maple Road leading to the suburbs, the mist was still thick, obscuring the dark pine rows. The flashing blue lights of the patrol car reflected on the wet pavement, while locals nearby stood silent, whispering to each other about something strange at the Hallorans' house. Salo and Deputy Thomas Moore stepped over the wooden fence into the porch. The back door was still ajar, its hinges squeaking faintly with every gust. Right at the entrance, Moore paused, observing the kitchen floor, overturned chair, disheveled tablecloth. A half-broken porcelain cup, dried liquid staining the tiles. The smell of kerosene, mixed with metal, wafted in the air, a scent very familiar to anyone who had visited Halloran Jewelers. Salo noted first, no signs of forced entry, lock intact, no break-in from outside. He signaled Moore to photograph the scene with the 35mm film camera. The flash popped several times, reflecting off the dark wooden walls. Under the dining table, Moore spotted a charred gray-black fabric scrap, mixed with a few small metal beads. He carefully clipped it into an evidence bag, labeling the time. 7:12 a.m. In the living room, an armchair was pulled askew from its position. On the floor was a long skid mark, possibly from something heavy being dragged. Near the window frame, Salo bent down, examining a clear mud shoe print with a rubber sole pattern, size 10 or 10.5, larger than Thomas Halloran's shoe size. The print led from the hallway into the kitchen, then disappeared. At the foot of the stairs, a wooden cabinet drawer was yanked open. Inside was a velvet box for a Colt .45, empty. Salo picked it up, checked the faintly engraved serial number beside it, and jotted it down. According to the permit on file at the station, Thomas Halloran was registered for a Colt with that exact serial number. Salo muttered, if someone used the gun from inside the house, this wasn't a robbery. The two went up to the second floor. The bed was neatly made, suitcases, coats, wallet, and personal jewelry all intact. On Corinne's vanity, the perfume bottle was still uncapped, the mirror fogged with steam. Moore noted, no missing valuables, no signs of voluntary departure. As they came back down to the first floor, morning light filtered through the broken window, casting tiny dew droplets in the air. Salo looked around, then said quietly, "This isn't simple. They didn't leave, they were taken." Moore nodded, jotting in his notebook, "Unusual disappearance. Possible violence involved." Salo ordered the file opened. Case 54-117H, Halloran Missing Persons. The first handwritten entry on yellow paper began domestic residence found unlocked. 2 residents unaccounted for. Outside in the yard, a larger crowd of neighbors had gathered. A reporter from the local Corvallis Gazette-Times tried to snap photos, but Moore asked him to keep his distance. Salo stepped out onto the porch, gazing at the foggy, distant fields. He told the patrol officer, Seal off this area within a 2-mile radius. Call in the search team, the department's 2 bloodhounds. I want tracks before the rain hits. At 7:45 a.m., the order went out over the radio. Search for 2 missing persons, Thomas and Corinne Halloran, suspected kidnapping or assault. Patrol cars rolled out from the neighborhood, sirens wailing long in the damp, cold air. Sallow turned back to the kitchen door, staring at the scattered shards of broken glass on the floor. Small pieces reflecting the faint light, he said softly, as if to himself. If someone wanted them gone, they knew exactly how to do it. Moore closed his notebook, slipping it into his coat pocket. Who do you think it was? Sallow replied. Voice low, someone they knew, or someone they trusted. Outside, the fog lifted gradually, revealing stretches of open fields leading to the Willamette forest. The search team began deploying, the first footprints imprinting on the wet ground. In the small house, the kitchen light still burned, illuminating the dining table with its 2 bowls of cold soup. The first silent evidence of a disappearance, no one knew where it would lead. The morning of March 2nd, 1954, dawned with a thick gray sky and scattered drizzle. But the small neighborhood on the edge of Corvallis was no longer as peaceful as usual. From dawn, patrol cars, rescue jeeps, and a few local militia trucks had parked along the road leading to the Hallorans' house. Rolls of yellow caution tape were strung around the wooden fence, and the blue police lights flashed on the puddles. Sheriff James Sallow stood on the steps, cold coffee in hand, watching the influx of people. Deputy Thomas Moore carried a topographic map, pinning red markers for areas to sweep. Within an hour, 40 people, police, reservists, and volunteers, had assembled. 2 bloodhounds from Salem were brought in, purebred German shepherds trained for missing persons. We'll start here, Moore pointed at the map. The Willamette River bank to the east, the pine forest behind, and the western fields. Split into 3 teams, maintain radio contact. Sallow nodded. If there's a body, a car, or physical traces, they'll be within 5 miles. Last night's rain might have washed most away, but not all. At 8 a.m., the search began. Dozens of flashlights swept through the damp woods, dog barks echoing into the mist. Along the riverbank, figures bent to check every odd dirt patch, every drifting log. The air was bitingly cold, filled only with the steady lap of waves against the shore. One group found old tire tracks on a dirt road leading into the forest, but the marks were blurred by rain, unidentifiable as to vehicle type. Another group found a wet gray fabric scrap near the fence, but preliminary forensics showed it didn't match the victim's clothing material. No blood traces, no bodies. By noon, Sallow called in civilian helicopter support, a privately owned Bell 47, piloted by a World War II veteran. From above he radioed, no vehicle, no smoke, no campfire signs. The forest area is completely clear. Ground teams continued around side roads and small wooden bridges over the river. Moore knelt by the bank, watching the rushing water, saying quietly, if they were dumped here, they'd float straight to the Columbia. Sallow replied, no car, no floaters. I don't think they drowned. It's something else. Around 2 p.m., patrol teams re-interviewed neighborhood residents. An elderly woman at the end of Maple Road said she heard metal clanging and an engine starting around 4:20 a.m. Her window faced east, toward the Hallorans' house. Are you sure about the time? Moore asked. Sure, she said. I just checked the clock before turning off the light. The dog barked non-stop. Then I heard tires crunching gravel. That detail became the first reliable timeline marker. Sallow marked in his notebook 4:20 a.m. Mechanical sounds departing the area. From there, he pegged the Hallorans' disappearance window between 12 o'clock and 4:30 a.m. Any suspicious activity after midnight had to fit within that frame. That afternoon, the Corvallis Gazette-Times arrived on scene. Reporter Earl Jennings, Rolleiflex camera in hand, asked Sallow while he directed the search team. Do you think it was a robbery, or they left on their own? Sallow frowned. I'm not speculating, but no one leaves home leaving lights on, dinner half-eaten, and the dog chained in the yard in the middle of the night. Jennings jotted every word. That evening, the paper ran a front-page headline, "Couple vanishes from their home. Corvallis police launch massive search." Meanwhile, the local radio station broadcast an alert. Anyone who saw the Oregon-plated gray Ford Custom Line 7C-127 on the night of March 1st was asked to contact Benton County Police. Calls flooded the station that night, but most were wrong or unverified. Someone reported a similar car in Albany, another in Salem, but no one confirmed the plates. As night fell, the search team returned to a makeshift headquarters near the Halloran house. Boots soaked, raincoats mud-caked, faces weary. A young officer said quietly, "Nothing, sir. No tracks, no blood, nothing." Sallow was silent. He sat in his car, opening his notebook. No body, no vehicle. Estimated disappearance time 12 o'clock, 4:30. No clear motive. No signs of voluntary departure. That night, Moore stood looking at the Halloran house, the kitchen light still on, as from the day before. He said to Sallow, "It's baffling. If it's murder, the perp cleaned up too well. If it's a disappearance, why no direction?" Sallow closed the notebook, voice low. "There are people who want everything to look like it never happened. In a small town, questions like that were enough to keep you up all night." On the afternoon of the second day of the search, as news of the disappearance spread throughout Corvallis, James Sallow decided to shift focus to the victim's closest relatives. From the start, he'd kept an eye on the name Nicholas Halloran, their only son, 20 years old, currently living in Eugene with his girlfriend Jacqueline Edison, daughter of the local pastor. Nick hadn't called police once since his parents vanished. Only when Sallow reached out did he agree to meet. The interrogation took place in a small office at the Eugene police station. Nick arrived alone, shirt ironed crisp, tie neat, not looking like someone in distress. When Sallow asked questions, he just nodded slightly, eyes cold, hand twirling a pencil on the table. "Do you know how long your parents have been missing?" "I heard yesterday morning. A friend in Corvallis called." "Why didn't you reach out to us proactively?" Nick shrugged. "I figured you already knew everything you needed." Sallow looked straight into his eyes. In 18 years as a cop, he knew this kind of calm, not composure, but emotional distance. Nick said he'd left Corvallis at the start of February, moved to Eugene with Jacqueline, looking for work at a car dealership. His parents hadn't approved, thinking he should continue school. "I hadn't talked to them in 2 weeks," he said, tone indifferent. "Maybe they went somewhere. They once mentioned going to Seattle for supplies." Deputy Thomas Moore interjected, "Have you been to Corvallis in the past week?" Nick answered immediately, "No, I've been working." Moore glanced at Sallow, then nodded, pausing the question. The interrogation ended after 30 minutes. Sallow requested a check of Nick's Eugene rooming house, citing verification of alibi. The small house where Nick and Jacqueline lived sat at the end of a dirt road, a few miles from downtown. The door was unlocked. In the living room, financial papers littered the table, bank debt notices, car sales contracts, an investment ledger penciled, "Loss, need quick capital." On the shelf, Sallow spotted a few trade magazines and a photo of Nick beside a silver gray Ford, the make matching his father's car. Jacqueline Edison emerged from the back room in a thin robe, appearance wary. She said softly, "Nick told me not to worry. His parents went to Seattle." Sallow asked, "Do you know when they left?" Jacqueline shook her head. "I'm not sure. I just heard him say so." Moore noticed an unopened suitcase in the bedroom, labeled Corvallis Baggage Company, a local shipping firm. He tilted his head, asking Sallow, "If they went to Seattle, why is the luggage still here?" Sallow was silent, just bending to pick up a bill from the floor. A gas receipt from the 99W station, dated March 1, 1954, 8:47 p.m., right when Thomas Halloran had left the store. Sallow asked directly, "Nick, where were you the evening of March 1st? Nick didn't blink. "In Eugene all evening. I saw a movie with Jacqueline." Jacqueline nodded slightly, but her voice hitched when Moore followed up. "What movie?" On the waterfront." Moore glanced at the room's clock. That film had played in the Eugene Theater Sunday afternoon, not Monday evening. As they left the house, Salo said quietly to Moore. "He's trying to remember the schedule," Moore replied, "or trying to fabricate it." On the drive back to Corvallis, the car radio carried a Gazette-Times update on the search progress. Salo turned it off, voice low. "I don't buy that he didn't go home." Someone on Monroe Street reported seeing a small Ford parked in front of Halloran's store the night of March 1st. Moore asked, "Sure about the plates?" "No, but the color and model match." That evening, they interviewed Martha Keene, the neighbor right next to the jewelry store. She confirmed seeing a young man standing outside the shop around 8:30 p.m. that night. "I thought it was Nick. He had on a long coat, head down, but the build was unmistakable." Salo returned to the station, calling Eugene. "Keep the Halloran kid in sight," he ordered. "No arrest, just surveillance. I want to know his every move." That night, Moore jotted a brief line in his own notebook. "Sun calm to a fault. Finances in disarray. Spotted near scene. Alibi unproven." Meanwhile, in Corvallis, the rain fell again. Lights in the empty Halloran house glowed dimly behind the curtains. No one knew that, just over 60 miles south, their son sat in a small room, silently staring out the window. The radio playing the police search bulletin, and not a single expression crossing his face. The next morning, as the search team paused due to heavy rain, James Salo decided to return to the Halloran house to re-examine every detail that the initial light might have missed. He arrived early, with Deputy Thomas Moore, bringing along the Benton County crime scene technician. Fog hung thick around the house, the grass in front of the porch still bearing the imprints of the police's boots from the day before, but Salo paid no mind. He strode straight into the kitchen, where the overhead light had been burning for 2 days straight, casting a weary glow on the dark streaks on the tile floor. As soon as they entered, Moore paused at the threshold, pointing down at the floor. The shoe print was clearer under the layer of damp dust that had dried. A rubber sole with deep V-shaped grooves, size about 10.5. Moore bent down to compare it with the sample of Thomas Halloran's shoes they'd collected from the closet. Size 9. "Bigger by nearly 2 sizes, he said. "Not his shoes." Salo knelt down, examining the print closely. "One person, entering from the hallway, stopping here," he said, using his pen to trace the direction. "Possibly the one who dragged something. Look, the skid mark at the base of the table matches the direction." The technician placed a ruler, photographing it with the film camera. Salo memorized the sole pattern, chevron design, a common military boot style from World War II. "This sole isn't sold commercially in Corvallis," he said. "Only guys who served or worked in machine shops wear this type." Moore nodded, his face tightening. They moved on to the window area. The broken glass still lay on the floor, the largest shard stuck in the wooden frame. The technician shone the light. The edges of the glass shards all pointed outward. "Broken outward," he said, meaning the force came from inside the house. Salo stepped closer, lightly tapping the frame with his pen. "Which means someone smashed it to make it look like a break-in," he said quietly. "If so, this is staged." Moore looked at him. "You think family did it themselves?" Salo didn't answer right away. He looked around the room, then said, "I think whoever did this knew this place inside and out." The smell of gun oil still faintly lingered in the air. That acrid metallic scent only someone who'd fired a gun nearby would recognize. The technician swept the table with ultraviolet light. A small brown streak appeared at the edge of the kitchen table, smudged about fingertip-sized. "Blood," he confirmed. Under normal light it was nearly invisible, but under UV it was clear as an ink stain. Salo signaled to photograph it and collect a sample. This blood stain dried before the milkman arrived, meaning it had been here at least 4 hours, Moore said. Salo glanced at his watch, calculating mentally. If the neighbor heard the car at 4:20 a.m., then the blood appeared before that. There was a gunshot in the house, he concluded. "We're not looking for missing persons anymore. This is a criminal case." He ordered the entire scene sealed off. No entry except for technicians. Local police set up more barriers, strung with "do not cross" signs. Curious neighbors were pushed back farther, leaving only the sound of wind and steady light rain on the tin roof. While the technician collected evidence, Moore opened a drawer by the refrigerator, discovering an empty ammo box. Winchester .45 brand, matching the type Thomas Halloran was registered to use for his Colt. The box had only 2 rounds left. "Gun missing, ammo missing, and gun oil smell," he said. Someone might have used Halloran's own gun. Salo pondered. If so, the perp wasn't an outsider. Only someone inside the house knew where the gun was kept. They returned to the living room, rechecking the skid marks on the wooden floor. Moore knelt, shining his flashlight. The skid ran parallel, nearly a meter long, heading toward the back door. Possibly dragging something heavy about 60–70 pounds, he estimated. Like a person being dragged. Salo didn't respond, just nodded slightly, then said, "Get the shoe sample, skid mark, and bloodstain to Salem for analysis this afternoon. I want confirmation before nightfall." That afternoon, in the makeshift office next to the scene, Salo stared at the area map pinned to the wall. Red thumbtacks marked the swept zones along the riverbank and western forest roads. He held a cigarette but didn't light it, voice low. If this is murder, they had a reason: money, grudge, or something else. Moore said, "I checked the bank accounts. No money missing, no transfers." Salo sighed. "So what are we looking for?" "Someone with a motive beyond emotions." He made a new decision: sweep the veteran lists across all of Benton and Lynn counties, especially those who'd served in Europe, where VSOLs were common. Administrative police were ordered to compile files, checking anyone who'd bought or repaired military-style boots in the last 3 months. Late afternoon, as Moore prepared to leave the scene, he glanced back through the broken window frame. Sunset light filtered through, glinting off the remaining glass shards like hundreds of tiny sparkling eyes. He shivered, not from the cold, but from the feeling that the house was looking back at them, as if to say, "I know, but I won't tell." Salo stood on the porch, collar pulled up high, eyes following the misty pine rows. "Thomas Halloran served in World War II, right?" Moore nodded. Then he might have known plenty of guys who wore boots like that. He stubbed out the unlit cigarette, saying quietly, "Start there. Check all the vets around here. Who owes money? Who did business with the Hallorans? I want names on the desk by morning." The kitchen light in the house had gone out, but the case had just truly begun. 2 days after discovering the strange shoe print and concluding there'd been a gunshot in the Halloran house, James Salo shifted the investigation toward Nicholas Halloran's connections. This son, from the start of the case, always loomed as a suspicious void. No emotion, no cooperation, no worry. The large shoe print, missing gun oil smell in the house, everything made Salo believe the thread leading outward had to start with Nick. Deputy Thomas Moore went down to Eugene, where Nick was living with his girlfriend Jacqueline Edison. He started asking around about the people Nick hung out with in the city. The first one who remembered was the owner of a coffee shop garage called Louis' Auto Stop, a hangout for car enthusiasts, racers, mechanics, and vets. Louis said, he came here all the time. Every weekend you'd see him. A few times with 2 older guys, Southern accents. One had a Navy tattoo on his arm. Moore jotted names. They called each other Johnny and Smithy. They smoked Lucky Strikes, played cards in the back corner. Young Nick would brag about his folks owning the jewelry store, about to open a branch. Moore immediately sent the info back to Corvallis. Just hours later, Salo got confirmation from state police records. Johnny Leon, 33, ex-Marine, served in Korea, arrested in 1952 for assault with injury. Aaron Smith, 29, logistics soldier prior for unregistered weapons possession. Both left the Albany base in 1953, currently unemployed. Salo reviewed the files, muttering, "V-sole boots, Navy matches." Moore replied over the phone. Louis said on the evening of February 28, Nick met them at the diner, talked privately for over an hour. Then all 3 left together. Salo asked, Anyone remember where they went? Not sure. Louis just said Leon drove an old Chevy, and Nick rode in the back. Salo closed the file. Evening of February 28th, he said, just 2 days before the Halloran's vanished. If not coincidence, then planning. The next day, Salo and Moore returned to the Halloran house to review the retained evidence. He held the photographed shoe print sample against military records. Preliminary results from the state of Oregon confirmed the size 10.5 chevron sole was issued to Marines in 1951. Exactly the type Johnny Leon had been issued. No doubt anymore, Moore said. We've got a Marine's footprint. Salo gazed through the foggy window frame into the empty kitchen. He lit a cigarette, smoke curling in the cold air. If Leon and Smith are the shooters, then Nick's the one behind it, he said. He needed money, knew them in Eugene, and his parents just refused a loan. To bolster the theory, Moore went back to Eugene for more questioning. Another witness, a waitress at Louis' auto stop, confirmed seeing Nick with Leon and Smith that evening. They sat in the back corner, talking low, but I overheard bits. The young guy said everything has to look like a burglary. Then the one with the Navy tattoo laughed, said, I'll handle that part. Moore had her sign an affidavit. Witness statements, criminal records, and military boot details now formed a solid link. Evening of 2/28, the meet-up in Eugene, night of 3/1, Halloran's vanish. Morning of 3/2, scene with gun smell footprints, inward broken glass. It all pointed to a premeditated plan. At the Corvallis office, Salo spread all the documents on the table. Shoe print photos, witness affidavits, files on the 2 vets, and Nick's financial list. He said slowly to Moore, not just suspects, they're a crew. Nick knew his parents had a gun, knew the house layout, knew their routines. Leon and Smith knew how to move fast, clean up traces. A 20-year-old kid couldn't stage a scene this elaborate without these two backing him. Moore nodded. Want to get an arrest warrant? Salo shook his head. Not enough yet. No bodies, no gun. But we need state support for deeper digging. That very evening, Salo wired an urgent message to Oregon State Police in Salem, requesting a joint federal-level investigation. The wire was 4 lines, concise and icy. Suspected conspiracy to kidnap murder. Suspects, Nicholas Halloran, Johnny Leon, Aaron Smith. Link Eugene, Corvallis. Request verification of activities, finances, and movements. After sending it, he leaned against the office window frame, looking out at the night settling over the town. The rain had stopped, but the pavement still gleamed like a mirror. If it's them, he said quietly. This isn't a disappearance anymore. It's a dirty contract. Outside, a police siren wailed long, echoing through the pines. In the file numbered 54117H, the phrase, suspected organized action, was underlined in red for the first time in the notes section. The Halloran case now officially escalated to state-level investigation. 10 days after the disappearance, on the morning of March 10, 1954, when fog still blanketed the western forest slopes of Corvallis White, the Benton County search team finally found something that changed the entire investigation direction. A group of volunteers and patrol officers were sweeping along a dirt road leading into the riverside forest, about 15 miles from the Halloran house. As they veered onto a seldom-used trail, where pines arched overhead in a tight canopy, a silvery gray glint caught the faint light through the moss. A car. The 1953 Ford Custom Line Oregon, plate 7C127, was immediately confirmed as the Halloran's vehicle. It sat about 30 yards off the road, nearly concealed by dry pine branches and rotted leaves. Mud caked around the tires, indicating it had been there at least a week. Salo and Moore got the call while still at the office. Both headed out right away. When they arrived, the sun had just broken through the fog, its dim light illuminating the roof dusted white with fallen moss spores. Salo pulled on gloves, opening the driver's side door. The lock was intact. No signs of tampering. Inside, the car was clean to an eerie degree. No blood, no footprints, nothing suggesting a struggle. On the back seat was a neatly folded wool blanket, the the smell of oil and tobacco mingling. They wouldn't abandon the car like this if attacked on the road, Moore said, standing by the door. Someone deliberately drove it here. Salo shone his light on the floorboards. In the corner under the passenger seat, he spotted a short piece of rope, frayed at the end as if freshly cut. He carefully picked it up with tweezers, bagging it as evidence. Under the rubber mat, the technician found a half-smoked Lucky Strike butt, clearly imprinted with faint lipstick. Moore looked, frowning slightly. Not Corinne, she didn't smoke. Salo replied dryly. But Leon does. And he always smokes Lucky Strikes. Continuing to check the glove compartment, Moore discovered a small folded scrap of paper tucked among car ads. The paper was oil-stained, scrawled in thick pencil. 427 glass done. The two exchanged looks. The 4 digits matched exactly the time the neighbor reported, hearing an engine starting and leaving the Halloran area. 4:20 to 4:30 a.m., Salo read slowly. Glass, done. Glass, finished. Could be a signal between them. Moore nodded, smashing the glass to fake the scene. They swept around the car. The mud under the tires had dried, but the technician determined the ground cracks showed it stopped here while the soil was still wet. Possibly right at dawn on March 2nd. The mud had hardened, topped with dry leaves, proving the car hadn't moved since. A parallel secondary tire track to the right, deeper, indicated careful turnaround. The perp didn't dump the car, they parked, shut it off, then left by other means, Salo said. They knew we'd find it and wanted to mislead. In the trunk, they found a small dent in the metal side, as if something heavy had been placed there. Nothing else but a few grains of sand and a gray fabric fiber scrap. Salo examined it closely, then bagged the sample, saying could be from the victim's clothing. As the car was towed out of the forest to impound, Salo watched it leave the trail. The Ford, once gleaming on Monroe Street, now sodden and cold, like silent proof of ruthless calculation. Moore checked his watch and said, "So we've got the car, the time, and the note," Salo replied. Still missing 2 people. Back at headquarters, Salo spread the 427 glass done paper on the table. Under the light, the slanted, hurried script looked like a right-handed person's. He ordered a comparison with Nick Halloran's bank signature, would take a few days to match. Meanwhile, Moore checked the cigarette butt. The lab reported the filter bore small tooth marks, matching the even bite style of a filterless smoker, a habit noted in Johnny Leon's military file as Lucky Strike addict. That evening, Salo gathered the team. Car driven to the woods morning of 3 halves. No blood, but trunk dent from heavy object, rope, and Leon's cigarette. Paper matches neighbor's engine time. Conclusion, perps left Halloran House in this Ford to escape. Moore was silent, gazing through the meeting room glass, where the rain had stopped, but the sky remained overcast. He said quietly, "They took both with them. So the bodies have to be somewhere between here and Willamette Forest." Salo nodded. "Tonight, start resweeping along the river. We've got direction." The Ford, now sealed in impound, sat under the dim fluorescent lights. A few late raindrops clung to the windshield, reflecting the line Salo wrote in his notebook before leaving. Car returned, but people not. The next morning, with fog still thick among the Willamette Forest pines, James Salo and Thomas Moore returned to the Ford discovery site. This time, they brought the forensics team, 2 bloodhounds, and a topographic map from the Forestry Service. The air was humid, the ground soft, and the smell of rotting leaves rose pungently. Salo stood scanning, pointing to the clearing where the car had been towed yesterday. "We start here. Expand the search radius 10 meters, he said. The technician bent to measure distances. The bloodhounds were unleashed on long leashes, circling the parking spot, noses to the ground. One suddenly halted, whining softly at the trail edge. Moore approached, pointing with his stick. Here, different colored soil. Salo knelt, raking aside the dry pine needles on top. Beneath, the ground was darker, damper, as if recently disturbed. Dug up and covered back, he noted. They might have buried something. The forensics team strung tape boundaries with rulers and string, starting probe digs layer by layer. The scent of damp earth rose, mixing with lingering tow truck gasoline. Each shovel bite thudded dully in the still air. Soon, the technician uncovered a small shell casing buried about 4 inches deep, a .38 special, silvery, despite faint oxidation. He handed it to Salo. "Definitely not from Halloran's .45 Colt," Salo said. "We've got at least 2 guns in this." Expanding the dig, they found an odd compacted soil patch, circular, about 60 centimeters across, looking like a spot where something heavy sat briefly. "Could be a suitcase, crate, or something equivalent," Moore said, voice low. He ordered digging half a meter deeper. The wet soil was prone to collapse, caking their boots. When the shovel hit a harder layer, nothing but roots and gravel fragments. 2 hours passed. No bodies, no other objects. Salo sighed, standing and brushing mud from his coat. "If they buried people, they moved them later," he said. Moore nodded, looking around. "This ground isn't natural like this. Someone dug, then refilled a few days later. Maybe to erase traces." He noted in his book, "Soil appears redug. No objects found." The technician collected soil samples at 3 depths, bagging them numbered in plastic. "We'll send to Salem for chemical analysis, check for organic tissue, or blood traces in the dirt," he said. Salo nodded curtly. "Do it, but I'm not hopeful. Rains washed it all clean." As the team packed up, Moore paused at the forest edge, eyeing the trail direction. Old tire tracks still faintly marked the ground. "See that?" he said to Salo. 2 different tread sets, one from the Ford, one narrower, maybe a small truck. If Leon and Smith came separately, they might have used that to get away. Salo examined closely, then nodded. "Tell state police to sweep reports of abandoned trucks in this area after 3 halves." That afternoon, heavy rain poured. The freshly dug earth turned to mush, slumping into shallow mud pits. Salo and Moore had to pull back before sunset. In the car, Moore peered through the fogged windshield, pensive. "We've got the car, the shell, the dig marks, but no people. It's like someone scrubbed it clean." Salo replied, "No one scrubs perfect. We're just too late." Back at headquarters, the forensics room reported first. The .38 casing bore rifling grooves, matching a Smith & Wesson revolver, common among vets. Didn't match any registered guns in Corvallis. "Vet, military boots, service weapon," Moore read aloud in the meeting room. "All points to the same crew," Salo said, "and the one who led them into the Halloran house could only be Nick." But when they went back to Eugene to find Leon and Smith, both had vanished from their rooming addresses. The landlord said they cleared out on 3/3, paid early, said they were heading south for work. After that, no one knew their whereabouts. By late March, the soil samples came back from testing. No blood traces, no DNA, no organic tissue signs. The report ended coldly. Insufficient basis to determine this as a burial site. In Salo's small office, the yellow light cast over the thick stack of files. He sat silently, fingers tapping a rhythm on the desk. "We have everything except the bodies," he said quietly. Moore replied, "And without bodies, the case won't go anywhere." The next day, Salo issued a brief press release. "No new objects discovered in the search area. The investigation continues." Outside, Oregon's gray rain continued, and the Halloran case began to cool, just like the sodden ground where the Ford had once lain still in the forest, keeping its secrets for another half-century. Winter 1955, nearly a year after the disappearance, Corvallis had returned to its usual quiet rhythm. The Halloran Jewelers sign had a corner peeled by the wind, dust blurring the letters, and passers-by now only spoke of the once-beloved couple in whispers. The 9-month search yielded no results. No bodies, no murder weapon, no witnesses, every lead dead-ended. James Salo still made a habit of stopping by the old office each morning, opening the case 54-117H file, and then closing it. On his desk were faded crime scene photos, a photocopied original of the paper reading, 427 glass done, and the Willamette Forest soil sample hardened like ash. The final forensics report from Salem confirmed no human DNA found, no organic tissue traces. Both he and Thomas Moore understood that without bodies, the case would never advance another step. Throughout 1955, they still tried to track Johnny Leon and Aaron Smith. Immigration records showed the two left Oregon in early April 1954, without forwarding addresses. Leon had bought a bus ticket to Boise, Idaho. Smith was believed to head south to Texas. When state police traced old addresses, the Eugene rooming house had been re-rented. The landlord only remembered that the two men cleared out in the night, paid cash, and said they wouldn't be back. After that, both vanished from the U.S. map. Nicholas Halloran still lived with Jacqueline in Eugene, unprosecuted due to lack of direct evidence. Salo once tried for a second search warrant, but was denied by the court. No body, no witnesses, no weapon, the prosecutor said. We only have speculation. Moore punched the file stack lightly, voice bitter. Speculation, that's right. But the kind that's spot on. By mid-1956, the investigation budget had run dry. Every new report just repeated the old conclusion. No further evidence located. Young officers gradually shifted to other cases. The Hallorans' house was foreclosed by the bank, windows boarded shut. As people passed by, they still spoke in low tones, as if afraid to wake something still lurking in the walls. One early September afternoon, Moore brought the nearly 200-page file stack to Salo's office. "We can't drag this out forever," he said. "I propose archiving it." Salo looked out the window, where Oregon skies were drizzling fine rain. He didn't answer right away, just pulled out a cigarette, flicking the lighter 3 times before it caught. "No body, no witnesses," he repeated, voice weary. "The file will go cold, like the ground at Willamette." On September 17, 1956, Benton County Sheriff's Office signed the order to close Case 54-117H. A red stamped line was added to the cover. Inactive. Unsolved disappearance. Moore personally placed the file in the basement steel cabinet, among hundreds of unsolved cases. As the cabinet door shut, the dry metallic clang echoed like a full stop to 2 years of effort. That evening, Salo drove through Willamette Forest, the road where the Ford had been found. His headlights swept over the dark, sodden pine rows. He stopped for a moment, opened the door, stared into the pitch blackness. Wind whistled through the forest gaps, carrying the scent of damp earth and the river's trickle below. "They're still out there somewhere," he whispered, "and sooner or later, they'll speak." But years passed, and no one heard any voice from the Halloran case anymore. In the department's case log, beside the missing persons entry, a single word was added that year. In 2005, as Oregon underwent a major overhaul of its criminal justice system, the state police department decided to establish the Cold Case Division, a unit dedicated to reviewing unsolved missing persons and homicide cases. In the Salem archives, hundreds of boxes labeled unsolved, stacked like sealed graves, each a unfinished story. At the end of the pick shelf row, dust thick to half an inch, sat a file untouched for nearly half a century. Case 54-117H, Halloran disappearance. Agent Amy Meredith, 36, was the first to reopen it. She'd just transferred from the Financial Crimes Unit to Cold Case Division, bringing her meticulous nature and habit of missing no detail. While colleagues picked cases with DNA data, fingerprints, or archived photos, Meredith was drawn to the Halloran file. Just a few handwritten reports, 4 black and white photos, a house diagram, and a short evidence list. "Little data, but evidence still exists," she told her supervisor. "I want to take a look. Sometimes the emptiness says the most." That April, the old Halloran house in Corvallis, abandoned for decades and on land slated for auction, was bought by a private construction firm to renovate into residential units. During demolition of the ground floor walls, a crew found something odd. While removing the wooden paneling behind the kitchen cabinet, they spotted a small square void, covered by an old brown board nailed by hand. One worker pried it open with a crowbar, revealing a small wooden box thick with dust. They thought it was old junk, but upon opening, they saw a Colt .45 pistol wrapped in oilcloth. Beside the gun was a rusted Super 8 film reel and a folded scrap of paper, scrawled in pencil, 427 window done. The site foreman called local police immediately, and within hours, Meredith was on scene. She stood in the dusty kitchen, afternoon light filtering through the broken window frame, illuminating the peeling wall patches where the box was found. "It's been here 51 years, she said quietly, almost a whisper. Meredith gloved up, opening the evidence bag. The Colt .45 was heavy, wooden grip cracked and dry, but the serial number still legible. She quickly cross-checked against old records. It matched the gun registered to Thomas Halloran in 1949, the one reported missing in the original file. The paper was nearly identical to the .427 glass done found in the car in 1954, differing by one word, glass replaced with window. Meredith noted, same writer, two different phases of the same plan. The Super 8 reel was rushed to the Salem Tech Lab for recovery. While awaiting results, Meredith reread the entire original file, Salo and Moore's handwriting, the firm script of an era without DNA or fiber testing. She lingered on the conclusion, no body, no proof of death. But now, this gun could change everything. That evening, back in her office, Meredith pinned a new paper to the board with just 3 lines, 1954. Disappearance. 1956. File closed. 2005. Evidence surfaces. She stared at the 3 lines for a long time, then whispered as if to the 2 people in the old black and white photo pinned to the file. Mr. and Mrs. Halloran, I'll bring you home. The Salem Criminalistics Lab was housed in a gray concrete building, nearly 3 hours' drive from Amy Meredith's office. The morning after the box discovery, she was there, carrying the sealed bag with the Colt .45, Super 8 reel, and small paper. Inside the forensics room, cold fluorescent lights reflected off the gun's metal surface, evidence dormant for half a century, now the center of a case thought forever buried in the past. Technician Ralph Donnelly, over 30 years handling metal evidence, gloved up and began wiping the thin dust from the grip. Under magnification, faint engravings emerged, C11475, Colt M1911A1, with government issue. Donnelly checked military archives and Oregon civilian records. Half an hour later, he looked up at Meredith, concise, exact match to Thomas Halloran's registered gun lost in 1954. Meredith noted it, her pulse quickening. After over 50 years, the first piece of physical evidence in the disappearance had returned. But what gripped her more were the fingerprints. Donnelly used cyanoacrylate fuming a special glue in a sealed chamber to reveal sweat oil residues. As white vapor clung to the wooden grip, a faint curved shape emerged, a clear thumbprint on the right-handed grip position. He projected the print onto the computer screen, then ran it through AFIS, the National Fingerprint Database. Less than 10 minutes later, the system beeped. The screen showed Nicholas Halloran, born 1934, Eugene, Oregon, fingerprint on file from 1953 driver's license and civil security check. Meredith stared at the result, lips pressing thin. She asked, "Match probability?" 100%. Donnelly replied. "Old print, but clear enough to confirm. It's definitely his." The son once suspected now officially left his print on the gun that vanished with his parents. While Donnelly finalized the report, Meredith moved to the second item, the Super 8 reel. It was heavily oxidized, plastic edges curled thin, but image recovery specialist Dana Fisher said frames could still be extracted. They loaded it into a specialized projector, flashing each frame onto a white screen in the dark room. Flickering light, dust motes hazy in the air. Then the first images of 1954 appeared, blurry, slightly yellowed, but clearly the Halloran house front, with the wooden Halloran Jewelers sign above the door. On frame 6, Fisher zoomed, pointing to 2 figures on the sidewalk. A young man in a long coat, head slightly bowed. Nicholas Halloran. The other bulkier, broad-shouldered, with a faint tattoo on his right arm, matching Johnny Leon's description, ex-Marine. They were exchanging something, seemingly a paper or small map. In the next frame, Nick glanced around, then pointed toward the house. In the distance, a woman, possibly Jacqueline Edison, stood waiting in a car. Meredith leaned back in her chair, exhaling sharply. "Can we date the footage?" she asked. Fisher nodded. "Based on shadow position and leaf type, late February, early March. But, look, here." She paused on the final frame, where the bottom corner bore a faint ink timestamp, February 28th, March 1st, 1954. Meredith smiled faintly, not from joy, but that familiar chill detectives feel when the final piece clicks. That evening, in the Cold Case Division office, Meredith pinned 3 printed film stills to the whiteboard. Nick and Leon outside the Halloran house, the Colt .45, the .427 window done paper. Below she bolded, time frame February 28th, March 1st, 1954. Night of disappearance. Then she opened Salo and Moore's original file. The old detectives had suspected Nick's involvement, but back then, no physical evidence. Now Meredith had fingerprints, footage, and weapon. Enough to officially reopen the investigation. She began rescreening all old witnesses, immigration records, vehicle registrations, and criminal data in the region from 1950 to 1970. Modern databases let her find leads faster than Salo could dream. Johnny Leon arrested in Idaho in 1960 for weapons possession, but released. Aaron Smith with a 1963 record in Texas for auto theft, both still alive into the early 2000s. Meredith printed photos, folded them, set them on the desk. "They hid for 50 years, she said quietly. "But time can't cover forever." As she left the room, she paused at the file cabinet, lightly touching the old cardboard box, labeled Case 54-117H. On the cover, Salo's 1956 handwriting remained, "No body, no witness." She took a red pen, adding a new line right below, "But there is a gun, and a name." The cabinet door shut, leaving a low thud echoing down the hall. After half a century, the Halloran disappearance breathed again, and this time, with Amy Meredith's hand, it wouldn't be buried once more. After matching the fingerprints and recovering footage from the Super 8 reel, Amy Meredith knew she held the key to reopening a case dormant for half a century. But to prove conspiracy, she needed living witnesses, those who'd been there, the night of March 1st, 1954. The names Johnny Leon and Aaron Smith had surfaced in Salo and Moore's old files, and now, with federal tracing tech, Meredith could track them. Social Security data showed Johnny Leon, born 1921, worked at a Boise, Idaho machine shop until 1979, then lost contact. Meanwhile, Aaron Smith, born 1925, had a residence near Fort Worth, Texas, registered for trucking with a transport firm. Meredith immediately sent verification requests to FBI branches in both states. A week later, news from Idaho, Leon still alive, 74, in a rundown mobile home park outside Boise. He lived alone. Neighbors described him as a quiet old guy, drinks beer on the porch, arm with a faded Marine tattoo. Meredith obtained a temporary hold order on 1954 disappearance involvement charges. On June 10, 2005, the FBI team with Meredith raided the mobile home at dawn. Leon sat at the kitchen table, half-empty beer can and old radio playing morning news in front of him. Upon hearing the warrant read, he just looked up, eyes squinting. 50 years. You're too late. In the search, they found a yellowed envelope in a wooden drawer, scrawled handwriting, "Job done, 50K confirmed." The signature below was smudged, but the first 2 initials legible, N.H. Meredith, stood frozen, gripping the table edge. N.H. Nicholas Halloran. The letter was the first physical link tying the victim's son to the suspected killer. In the Boise interrogation room, Leon seemed weary but cooperative. He recognized the Halloran name immediately when Meredith mentioned it. "Nick hired me and Smith," he said hoarsely. Voice thick with tobacco. He said, "Just scare his folks. Get some money." I was promised 50 grand, big cash back then, Meredith asked. Did you kill them? Leon shook his head. No, I didn't shoot anyone. When it went bad, I bolted. Smith was the one who pulled the trigger. Did you see Nick after? No, he vanished, and so did I. I thought it buried forever. Leon signed the statement, hand shaking. As Meredith gathered papers, he watched her, adding, I did wrong, but that kid, he's the devil. He didn't have a steady hand. 3 days later, in Texas, Aaron Smith was arrested in an old Fort Worth neighborhood. He'd been busted multiple times for auto theft, living on pension and odd jobs. When police arrived, he didn't resist. In his coat pocket, they found a faded photo of 3 men outside a diner, Nick, Leon, and Smith, matching the Super 8 footage exactly. In questioning, Smith initially denied. He claimed he just knew Nick from Corvallis by chance and never went there. But when Meredith showed the handwritten letter, "Job done, 50K confirmed," he fell silent for a long moment. Then said quietly, I got cash from the girl with him. Jacqueline, that was her name. She handed an envelope at a Eugene diner. 5 grand cash, rest promised after the job. Did she know what would happen? Meredith asked. Smith looked at the table. Yeah. She said just scare Mr. and Mrs. Halloran into signing asset transfers. But when Leon fired, I knew we'd gone too far. Smith detailed the night of March 1, 1954. They arrived at the Halloran house near midnight, via the back door, as Nick directed. Thomas Halloran spotted them, resisted. Leon fired a warning shot, bullet hitting a wooden chair. Corinne screamed. Smith held her. Then they dragged both to the car. I drove, Leon in back. Nick stayed outside, didn't come in, but he knew everything. Smith said. We took them away, then it ended in the woods. The statements from Leon and Smith sent back to Oregon matched nearly identically. Nick hired them, Jacqueline Edison handled payments, and the initial goal described as scare parents into signing papers. Meredith realized the story had gone far beyond threat. They'd kidnapped, and likely killed. The evidence now too clear to ignore. Nick's fingerprints on the gun, footage of Nick and Leon, the job done. 50K confirmed letter, matching statements from the 2 vets. Meredith called the Benton County prosecutor, voice restrained but firm. I have it all, enough for warrants on Nicholas Halloran and Jacqueline Edison, for premeditated murder conspiracy. The line went silent for seconds before replying. You sure, Meredith? After 50 years? She responded. I'm not sure about much, but I'm sure that on the night of March 1, 1954, 2 innocent people died, and their own son ordered it. When she hung up, she stood before the investigation board in her office. The red cold case 54117H was circled thickly. Below it, she added a new line. Status reopened. Active investigation. For the first time in half a century, the Halloran case was no longer the past. The Sacramento interrogation room was so quiet the air conditioner's hum was audible. Amy Meredith sat across from Nicholas Halloran, 71, gaunt, silver-streaked hair, face cold and hard as stone. On the table sat a neat stack of documents, printed Super 8 stills, photocopy of the job done, 50K confirmed letter, fingerprint match file on the Colt 45, and Jacqueline Edison's bank receipts. The camera light blinked red. Meredith began, voice even and light. You're Nicholas Halloran? Yes. I have a few things for you to look at. She pushed the first photo toward him, a blurry image of 2 men standing outside the Halloran house. You're on the left, in the long coat. Photo taken from Super 8 film found in your parents' house wall. Nick glanced at it, lips curling. I don't remember anything. Old photo. Meredith didn't respond, just took out the second one, the fingerprint printout. Print on the Colt missing since 1954. Matches your driver's license record. I cleaned that gun back when I lived at home. Long time ago. And long enough for 2 people to die? She interrupted, voice sharp. Nick froze. Meredith placed the old letter in the middle of the table, faded handwriting. Job done. 50K confirmed. MH. This letter found in Johnny Leon's house. He confessed, "You hired him and Aaron Smith." Nick looked down, eyes blurring behind his glasses. "Leon's a liar. I just asked them to help with work. Nothing to do with my parents." Meredith leaned back in her chair, staring straight. "Those two say exactly the same thing. Both say you hired them to scare your parents into signing asset transfers. They both say Jacqueline Edison delivered the money. You deny it?" Nick shrugged, voice dry. "I don't know what Jacqueline did." She turned off the recorder, signaled the officer to bring Jacqueline Edison into the next room. The girl from back then was now nearly 70, silver-haired, hands trembling. Meredith gently, "Jacqueline, I just need the truth." Jacqueline was silent for a moment, then said softly, "I withdrew the money. $5,000, February 28. Nick said just to scare them into signing papers. I didn't think they'd be killed." She recounted that morning of February 28. Nick wrote a few lines and gave them to her to take to Louis' auto stop garage in Eugene, where Leon and Smith waited. She placed the money envelope on the table. Leon grinned. "Got it. Just need to scare them." Jacqueline's hands shook. "I thought that's all it was." Meredith asked further, "Did you know about this letter?" She pointed to the job done, 50K confirmed paper. Jacqueline looked, tears falling. "I didn't write it, but I know it's real." Nick said he'd send the rest after everything was done. When Meredith returned to the main room, Nick sat straight, worry appearing in his eyes for the first time. She sat down, opened the file. Jacqueline confirmed withdrawing the money, giving it to Leon to scare. "She believed you, but they didn't just scare." Nick shook his head, trying to keep his voice calm. "She's old, memory wrong. No. She remembers clearer than you. Both those guys say the same. You were there the evening of March 1st, directing how to enter the house, then waited outside. They took your father's own gun." Meredith pulled out the second film photo. Nick standing outside the house, hand pointing to the back door, Leon leaning to look. "This isn't imagination. This is real. You can deny, but images don't lie." Nick pressed his hand to his forehead. No response. Meredith lowered her voice. "Leon says they only planned to scare, but Smith pulled the trigger when Thomas resisted. And you paid, ordered, then stayed silent for 50 years. Nick looked at her, weary. "I didn't order them killed. I just wanted them to understand. I needed money to start over. And you started by hiring armed men?" Silence. The wall clock ticked, stretching endlessly. Meredith took out the bank receipt and placed it beside the handwritten letter, two pieces of evidence side by side, linked by the scrawled, in H. "You know, Nick," Meredith said slowly, "in the old Benton County file, they wrote, 'No body, no proof.' I just reread it last night. But now we have both, proof and the doer." She stood up, leaning in to look straight into his eyes. "You really scared them to death." Nick inhaled sharply, eyes reddening, then bowed his head. His hands clasped together, trembling. No confession, but no denial either. Just heavy breathing in the room. Meredith sat down, noting in the record, "Suspect remained silent after evidence presented." She turned the recorder back on, stating clearly into the lens, "Interrogation ends at 7:12 p.m. Suspect refuses further response." She gathered the papers, voice calm. "We'll forward the file to the prosecutor. This time, no one will call the Halloran case a disappearances anymore." Nick was led down the long hallway, flickering lights, casting his long shadow on the floor. Meredith stood watching, no satisfaction, just heaviness. 51 years, all started from one silent night, and ended with that same silence. As the door closed, she opened her notebook, wrote the final line. He didn't speak, but the truth spoke for him. Halloran case enters final phase. The interrogation room drowned in pale white light. Johnny Leon sat at the table, hands cuffed, eyes red from sleeplessness. Across, Agent Amy Meredith opened her notebook, voice even. Neither harsh nor soft, just enough to make Leon understand it was time for the truth. The night of March 1st, 1954, Meredith began. "How did you and Aaron Smith enter the Halloran house?" Leon inhaled deeply. Looked up, voice hoarse. Back door. Nick said it was unlocked. We arrived around 4 a.m. He paused, looked down at the table, then continued. I remember clearly, cold, foggy. Smith went first, I followed. When we opened the door, the dog inside started barking. Thomas Holleran jumped up, grabbed his gun. Meredith noted every word, occasionally just nodding, not interrupting. Leon swallowed, eyes blurring. Thomas fired first. I heard glass shatter, then Smith fired back. One shot hit his chest, then two more. Corinne screamed. I didn't know what to do, but pull Smith out. But Smith turned back, hit her with the gun butt. She passed out. I thought she was dead. The air in the room thickened. Meredith looked up, eyes cold. Then what did you do with the bodies? Leon clenched his fingers, nails digging into skin. We took them in the Ford custom line. Nick gave us the keys. He said, take them far from the house, don't let anyone see. We drove toward the Willamette River. When we reached the woods near Salem, Smith stopped, said to dig. I remember gasoline smell, smoke, dug over 3 feet deep, then buried both, laid them side by side, Meredith asked. Do you remember the exact location? Leon nodded, voice trembling. Yes, about 18 miles from Forest Trail Path, near the old wooden guard post spot. Ground there was easy to dig. Meredith flipped the file, pulled out the scrap paper, placed it on the table. 427, done, she said slowly. This paper found in the Ford. Now you say they were shot and buried around 4:30 a.m. matches. Leon looked at the paper, nodded slightly. I wrote it. Smith said we needed a signal for Nick to know it was done. And the glasses in the note. Broken glass in the kitchen. I wrote that so Nick would know we'd gotten inside. The room filled with the recorder's hum. Meredith sat still, letting seconds of silence stretch, then asked, how much did you get? Leon replied, almost a whisper, not the full promise. Just 5,000. Smith kept the envelope. Nick said the rest, after everything settled. She noted briefly, then gently closed the file. What did Smith do after leaving the woods? Leon replied. He laughed, said done. 4:27 on time. I drove back to Eugene, tossed the .38 in the river, then left Oregon the next morning. Meredith looked at him long. Why talk now? Leon was silent a moment, his voice hoarse and slow. Because I'm old. Because he, Nick, lived his whole life like nothing happened. And me, every night I hear the gunshots in my head. She sat silent, then said softly, thanks for speaking. But this statement will be official. Ready to sign? Leon nodded, took the pen with trembling hand and signed. Right after, Meredith left the room, handed the file to Moore waiting in the hallway. He looked at her, asked, what'd he say? She replied shortly, enough for an exhumation order. 3 hours later, the Benton County Forensics team with State Police Unit arrived at the site Leon described, a riverside forest stretch along the Willamette, nearly 18 miles from Corvallis. Afternoon sky thick gray, light rain falling. Moore tramped through rotting leaves, pointed where Leon stood. This is the spot. Leon, in a prisoner's coat, was brought along to point. He pointed down at a flat patch of ground, sparse grass. We buried right there. Under the biggest buckeye tree root, technicians set up tents, strung marking tape. One used a soil probe, stuck it down, ground softer than normal. Hit something. Meredith stood beside Moore, face expressionless. The first shovel plunged into the earth, damp and iron tang scent rising. As the first layer of soil was peeled back, a dark brown object emerged gradually. Rotted fabric, then a glinting metal snippet. A team member said softly. Belt buckle. Moore inhaled deeply, signaled to dig slower. Moments later, human bone appeared, mixed in mud. 2 sets, side by side. One smaller, hand still clasped. Meredith stood still, gloved hand clenched tight. Call forensics, she said softly. We found them. Leon watched from afar, tears streaming. I told you, I told the truth. Meredith didn't look at him, just replied. Too late, but finally, they're being brought home. As dusk fell over the forest, forensics vans flashed lights, illuminating two carefully sealed white body bags. Outside the barriers, wind through the Willamette River sounded like a belated farewell after over half a century. The morning of June 15, 2005, Oregon skies blanketed in thick clouds, damp fog wrapping the buckeye canopies in the riverside forest along the Willamette. The forensics team, Benton County Police, and Agent Amy Meredith arrived early, following coordinates Johnny Leon had pointed out the night before. It was a flat clearing, obscured by dense ferns, about 200 yards from the forest trail path. Everything looked exactly as in the statement, damp, cold, and silent, as if guarding secrets for half a century. Meredith, in a long gray coat, stood beside lead forensics Dr. Richard Elms. He raised the ground-penetrating radar, moving slowly over the taped area. The screen showed unusual wave ripples, anomaly at about 3.5 feet deep, he said, voice low, steady. Meredith looked down, nodded slightly. Exact spot Leon described. They began manual digging to avoid damaging evidence. Each shovel bite done carefully, dark, sticky soil. Metal clinking on gravel sounded, then a team member called loudly, "Something here." The group halted. The technician bent down, brushed thin soil with a small brush. Under dim light, an ivory-colored object began to emerge. A human skull, round, small. No one spoke. The air froze. Dr. Elms signaled to stop digging, then directed, "Dig an arc around, don't touch directly." Layers of soil gradually peeled back, and in just 10 minutes, a shoulder bone and rib cage appeared. Nearby, a rotted fabric scrap emerged, ash gray, with tiny lace trim. Clearly part of a woman's dress. Meredith knelt, gloved, lightly touched the fabric edge, said softly, "Corinne," one word, but her voice trembled slightly. Half an hour later, the second skeleton was found, larger, parallel, less than a meter from the first. Beside the ribs was a faintly shiny metal shell casing. When the technician picked it up, everyone recognized immediately, .38 special, matching the type found in the forest in 1954. The casing was bagged as evidence, coded 54117 HRD. Meredith stood silently watching the two skeletons outlined with white tape boundaries. Beside her, Moore, now retired but invited to witness, gripped his hat tight. "I thought I'd never see this day in my lifetime," he said, voice hoarse. They were here all that time. The forensics team worked until afternoon. As the sun faded, two white body bags were carefully lifted from the pit, each bone framed, photographed, and numbered. Dr. Elms gave preliminary conclusion: one male, one female, both with gunshot trauma. Male has sternum fracture consistent with direct shot. Female has skull fracture, matching hit with gun butt in Leon's statement. Meredith noted quickly, bone structure matches, parallel position, accompanying dress and shell evidence, high match probability. She stood watching the text pack up, eyes tinged sad. 51 years, she said softly, and finally found less than 20 miles from home. As the forensics van left the forest, Meredith and Moore walked slowly to the edge. Wind through buckeye rose, dry leaves rustling like whispers. Moore said softly, "Salo once wrote, 'No body, no proof.'" He was wrong. Meredith nodded slightly. Not wrong, just too early. That evening, at the Salem Medical Examiner's Office forensics room, experts began DNA testing from bone marrow. They cross-matched with hair samples of Thomas and Corinne archived from 1954, a rare holdover. 3 days later, results sent to Cold Case Division, 99.98% match, Thomas Halloran, male, Corinne Halloran, female. Meredith received the report at 9 a.m. She looked at the confirmed identification line without speaking. Then she picked up the phone, called Moore. "We have them." On the other end, Moore's voice choked. "For real?" "Yes," she replied. 51 years later, they came home. The next day, state police held an official press conference. Meredith presented to the press, voice firm, the two skeletons discovered in the riverside forest along the Willamette have been confirmed by DNA testing as Thomas and Corinne Halloran, missing since March 1954. Their deaths determined by .38 caliber gunshot impact and head trauma. The press room fell dead silent before flashes erupted. A reporter asked, "Who will be charged?" Meredith looked straight at the lens, answered concisely, "Those who kept them in the ground for 51 years, including their own blood." That afternoon, she returned to the site one last time. The refilled pit neatly reseeded with grass, a temporary wooden marker staked, evidence recovered. Case 54-117H. Meredith placed a wildflower sprig there, whispered, "Rest now." On the drive from the forest, late light through the car window reflected the sparkling Willamette waters. In the rear view, the woods faded, leaving only silent emptiness, the silence of justice after half a century waiting to be heard. June 20, 2005, just 4 days after DNA results confirmed the two skeletons, as Thomas and Corinne Halloran, Oregon State Police acted. A gloomy morning, fog blanketing the Sacramento suburbs, where Nicholas Halloran had lived for years under another name. As patrol cars stopped before the old wooden house, neighbors barely comprehended before the task force surrounded it. The arrest warrant, signed by Portland Federal Court, on 2 counts, premeditated murder conspiracy and solicitation of murder. Halloran opened the door in pajamas, eyes dull as he saw Meredith approach, badge gleaming on her coat chest. "Mr. Halloran, you are under arrest for conspiracy and solicitation to murder Thomas and Corinne Halloran on the night of March 1, 1954. He said nothing, just bowed his head, hands trembling as cuffed. Miranda rights echoed in the quiet yard, closing over half a century of silence. At the same time, south in Oregon, Jacqueline Edison was arrested while living with her grown daughter. She stayed silent as led away, no resistance. Upon hearing the charges, she just said softly, "I knew this day would come." During the search of Nicholas's house, police found a series of old documents stored in an iron box in the basement. Papers yellowed, ink faded, but enough to make Meredith freeze. Inside there was personal debt ledger, detailing losses from 1953. 1954, including the entry Lane, 5,000 Smith, 2,500 Jack. Transfer partial. Bank transaction records from Eugene Savings, matching the receipt Meredith had once used as evidence. And especially, a handwritten letter in Johnny Leon's scrawled handwriting, dated March 5, 1954, addressed to Nick H., with the cold line, "Everything's done, 4/27. You know what to do with the rest of the money." Meredith held the letter in the sealed bag, saying softly, "So he kept it all, like a souvenir." In Jacqueline Edison's house, police seized old ledger scraps recording 1954 expenditures, including the line withdrawal. Though she always insisted she didn't know about the murders, the financial evidence proved she was the one who executed the cash transactions for the killers. That afternoon, at the Cold Case Division headquarters in Salem, Meredith sat before a desk piled with files, the light reflecting off the aged papers. Across the desk, Benton County Prosecutor Jack Harlan was reviewing the nearly 200-page indictment. He looked up. "I've never seen a case where everything fits this perfectly. The gun, the letters, the DNA, the statements, the money. Now it's time to bring them into the light." Meredith replied, 51 years late, but still in time. That same afternoon, Nicholas Halloran, Jacqueline Edison, Johnny Leon, and Aaron Smith were transferred to the Portland Federal Detention Center. Local media called it Oregon's arrest of the century. TV stations replayed footage of Meredith leading the convoy, her face calm, without a trace of pride. To her, it wasn't a victory, but a necessary ending. At the federal preliminary hearing, the prosecutor listed the array of evidence, Nick's fingerprints on the Colt. .45, the weapon used in the crime, the job done, $50K confirmed letter found at Leon's house. Matching statements between Leon and Smith about 4:27 a.m. Action complete. Bank records confirming Jacqueline's withdrawal on February 28. The Super 8 film capturing Nick and Leon meeting outside the Halloran house. In court, Leon and Smith agreed to cooperate, signing plea deals for reduced sentences in exchange for testimony. In supplemental statements, Leon confirmed the entire plan was orchestrated by Nick, choosing the timing, providing the keys, directing the backdoor approach, and arranging the burial. "I didn't think he'd really do it," Leon said. "But he told me, if they don't sign, consider it done." The prosecutor read that aloud in court, and the room fell dead silent. Meredith sat in the back, quietly taking notes. That same day, the U.S. District Court for Oregon formally charged the 4 defendants. Nicholas Halloran, premeditated murder conspiracy, solicitation of murder, and obstruction of justice. Jacqueline Edison, accomplice in providing financial support for the murder crime. Johnny Leon and Aaron Smith, first-degree murder and compensation for criminal acts. The case file was classified Federal Special Category Serious Crime. Meredith knew that when the feds got involved, no one could escape. A few days later, she personally delivered the entire original file, evidence, and DNA results to the Benton County District Attorney's Office, where the disappearance investigation had begun in 1954. She placed the file stack on Prosecutor Harlan's desk, speaking slowly. "This is everything we have. The Halloran case is officially transferred to Benton County for prosecution." Harlan flipped the cover, looking at the faded handwriting of Sheriff Salo from years ago. "No body, no witness." He smiled faintly. "Now we have both." That evening, Meredith left the building, standing silently watching the city lights of Salem reflect on the river surface. She recalled Moore's words by the exhumation pit. They were here all that time. Now justice was the same. It had never been lost, just waiting to be found. In the car, she opened her notebook, wrote the final line for the report to the feds, all 4 defendants charged. Cold Case 54-117H, officially reopened and prosecuted. Justice deferred, not denied. Then she closed the notebook, looking out at the damp Oregon night. Somewhere in the darkness of the pine rows, the wind rustled like the voice of the past, echoing the words she had whispered by the pit that year. 51 years later, they came home. March 2006, the Oregon Federal Court was packed. In the spectator seats, reporters from the Oregonian, Salem Tribune, and local TV stations jostled for shots. 52 years after the Hallorans' disappearance night, the trial finally began. In the front row, Agent Amy Meredith sat straight, thick file before her. The woman who had pulled the case from the shadows of the past into the light. On the defendant bench, Nicholas Halloran, now 72, hair fully white, face gaunt. Beside him sat Jacqueline Edison, small, thin, silent. The other 2 men, Johnny Leon and Aaron Smith, in orange prison jumpsuits, sat separately, heads bowed. When Judge Robert Avery banged the gavel to open, the room hushed. Prosecutor Jack Harlan stepped to the podium, voice low and firm. "Your Honor, members of the jury, this case is a reminder that crime is never erased by time. We will prove that Nicholas Halloran, with greed and coldness, hired 2 war veterans to murder his own birth parents, Thomas and Corinne Halloran, in the early hours of March 1, 1954. He raised his hand to point at the large screen where Tex replayed the Super 8 film. Flickering light, images shaky from age, Nick standing before the Halloran house, talking to Leon, pointing to the back door. "This is visual evidence, found in the victim's house itself. Timestamp on the film, February 28 to March 1. Next, he held up the evidence bag. The forensically examined Colt .45, Leon's handwritten letter with the line "Job done," $50K confirmed, the scrap 427 glass done, and the fingerprint printout matching Nick. Each item projected large on screen, Each evidence item read clearly in court. Physical, financial, and testimonial evidence all point one way: premeditated murder conspiracy, no longer speculation. This is fact. The prosecution continued with Leon and Smith's depositions, recorded pre-trial. Leon's hoarse voice echoed through speakers. He hired me and Smith. He gave keys, said clean everything up. Then Smith, Jacqueline delivered the money. Nick promised the rest after it was done. Each quoted line from the prosecution added weight to the room's air. It was Nick's defense attorney, a middle-aged man named Carl Bennett, who stepped up to counter. Your Honor, my client doesn't deny meeting Leon and Smith. But how they acted, who they killed, who they shot, wasn't directed by Mr. Halloran. No evidence shows my client pulled the trigger or ordered killing. What the prosecution calls conspiracy is inference after half a century. He turned to the jury, voice sharp. Two men with records, needing reduced sentences, testified in their favor. And that film, who proves the people in it, weren't just a chance meeting. Prosecutor Harlan responded immediately. We don't need to prove who pulled the trigger. Murder conspiracy forms with agreement, preparation, and consequence, and all are present here. For 3 straight days, the court reviewed the entire file, from the 1954 scene reports to the 2005 DNA forensics. Meredith, as investigating witness, detailed finding the wooden box, the Colt, and the fingerprint matching process. When the prosecutor asked, Agent Meredith, do you believe this is a murder orchestrated by the son himself? She replied decisively, I don't believe. I know. That short answer silenced the room for seconds. On the 5th day of trial, closing arguments ended. Bennett still clung, no proof of who pulled the trigger. But in his final summation, the prosecutor said one line, like fate, we don't need to know who pulled the trigger, just who put the gun in their hand. The jury deliberated nearly 4 hours. When they returned, the foreman stood to read the verdict. Leon and Smith were convicted of first-degree murder, and Jacqueline Edison of accomplice in financial support for murder conspiracy. Judge Avery read the sentences: Nicholas Halloran, Johnny Leon, Aaron Smith, 35 years imprisonment, no parole for first 20 years. Jacqueline Edison, 6 months imprisonment, 10 years probation, and obligation to testify for the prosecution in all subsequent hearings. As the sentences rang out, Nick sat motionless, eyes sunken, expressionless. Jacqueline bowed her head, hands trembling. In the spectator seats, Meredith sighed softly, not joyful, just relieved. As if the weight of 51 years had been set down. On the witness stand, Moore, Sallow's old partner, wiped his glasses, said quietly, finally, justice found them. The trial ended with the gavel's echoing bang. As people left the room, Meredith lingered, looking at the empty front row seat, where she imagined the victims sitting from the old photo she carried. She opened her notebook, wrote the final line in the official report to the Department of Justice: justice delayed, not denied. Outside, spring snow flurried lightly. For the first time since 1954, the names Thomas and Corinne Halloran were mentioned, not in missing persons, but in the section for victims whose justice had been reclaimed. And as Meredith descended the courthouse steps, she looked up at the gray sky, said softly, they came home. News of the verdict spread within hours after the judge's gavel. Front pages of the Oregonian, Corvallis Gazette-Times, and countless TV channels ran the same headline: 1954 cold case solved, son behind it all. Black and white photos of Thomas and Corinne Halloran reappeared, for the first time in over half a century. Below them, the aged, dazed face of Nicholas Halloran, the son who once made the town proud, now a symbol of betrayal. Papers wrote, justice arrived, though later than a lifetime. In Corvallis, the atmosphere was heavy yet quiet. Residents, who lived alongside the Halloran family in the 1950s, still remembered the small jewelry shop at the corner of Monroe Street, where Thomas always smiled handing wedding rings to customers, where Corinne wrapped every package in crisp white paper. Now, with the truth revealed, they held a memorial right at the riverside forest where the bodies were found. That morning, hundreds gathered under Oregon's silver-gray sky. By the still river, a simple wooden table served as the podium. In the center, two old photo frames, a bouquet of white daisies, and beside them, Moore, now 90, slowly stepping up. He was the deputy sheriff in the 1954 investigation, who witnessed every failure, then the case's revival. His voice hoarse but clear. "I carried the Halloran case my whole life. At times I thought it would die in the file cabinet. But someone didn't forget. Justice doesn't need to be hasty, just not forgotten." Applause rose, soft but long. Many cried. An elderly woman, once Corinne's student, placed a wreath at the memorial base. "She taught me handcrafting jewelry and how to keep promises. Today, the promise is kept." As the ceremony ended, Amy Meredith was invited to speak. She stepped up, wind tousling her hair lightly, voice calm but moving. "I didn't investigate to find the guilty, I investigated to bring them home. And today, they are home." Behind her, the Willamette River flowed steady, carrying fallen yellow leaves. People stood silent, listening to the water like whispers from the two who had lain here too long. A year later, Corvallis authorities made a special decision. The plot where the Halloran house once stood was repurposed into a small memorial park named Halloran Square. No traces of walls, roof, or old fence remained. Just green lawn, wooden benches, and a small fountain with intertwined silver ring statue, symbol of the craft the couple devoted their lives to. On the bronze plaque at the park entrance, engraved, "For the patient souls who waited to be heard." Every year in early March, people still come to lay flowers. They remember not just the two lost, but also the two detectives, Salo and Moore, who started the investigation without an ending, so half a century later, the next generation could finish it. And at the Willamette River bank, right where the forensics team exhumed in 2005, a granite memorial stone was erected. On dedication day, light rain fell. Oregon's signature missed, Meredith, now a lecturer at the State Police Academy, still returned for the ceremony. She was the first to place her hand on the stone face, where gold letters read Thomas and Corinne Halloran missing 1954, found 2005. The truth waited, and it was found. She stood there a long time, silent. Moore, in a wheelchair beside her, said slowly, "I thought I'd die without knowing what happened. But turns out justice just slept." Meredith turned, smiled, "And you woke it by not giving up." Oregon media later called Meredith the one who brought souls home. A photo of her, before the stone, graced the cover of Time Northwest with "Cold Case Closed, Justice After 51 Years. Corvallis town, after many years, took on a different face. People no longer avoided the Halloran name like a wound, but as part of memory. Children played around the Halloran Square fountain. Adults retold the story as proof that here justice may be slow, but never lost. That evening of the memorial dedication, Meredith returned to the Willamette alone. Wind rippled the water, reflecting distant golden lights. She placed a flower in the river, whispered, "Thomas, Corinne, Oregon remembers you, and now you're remembered forever." The flower drifted far, carried by faint moonlight. On the stone, raindrops began to bead, streaming in rows, sparkling like diamonds, what the two lived their lives to create. Meredith turned and walked away, slow steps on the damp path. Behind, water and wind blended, like a complete ending to the story, spanning over half a century. Justice doesn't need to be hasty, just not forgotten. Looking from the Halloran case to America today, the biggest lesson is, justice delayed is still justice, but only if community, family, and system preserve traces of truth. Seemingly small details unlock the entire case. The .427 glass done, scrap in the abandoned Ford, gun oil, smell and inward broken glass from inside the house, not a normal break-in. Lucky strike button V-sole boot print, hinting at veterans. Super 8 film capturing Nick and Leon before the door. Nick's fingerprints on the Colt, .45. And finally, the Willamette Riverbank Memorial, with missing 1954, found 2005. In modern American life, small signs like unusual family behavior, Nick's indifference, debts, bad associations, cash withdrawal history, Jacqueline's $5,000 pull, or staged scenes, lights left on, overturned chair, windows smashed from inside, are red flags for domestic violence and elder abuse. Practical advice: families should set up safety protocols, daily check-ins, emergency contact lists, enable bank transaction alerts for seniors, install security devices and event logs. Store documents, debt ledgers, letters, receipts, instead of discarding. Report to police immediately on signs of scripting, like illogical break-ins. On the community side, support budgets for cold case units and participate in memorials, like at Halloran Square, to sustain collective memory. Justice doesn't need to be hasty, just not forgotten, and not overlooking small details that can save a life. If you believe justice can be delayed but never disappear, hit subscribe to the channel so we can continue exploring other cold cases of America with you. Thank you for following the Halloran case story. See you in the next video, where truth awakens from the shadows once more.